Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Livingston of WantLeverage Communications, and I'm here for another installment of Quorum Live, brought to you by the Quorum Initiative, which is a global group of dynamic women in Washington, D.C., New York, and London, looking to create change in the workplace for women, clearing a pathway for leadership positions and more women in the C-suite, more female representation on corporate boards, and more investments in women-owned and led businesses. I'm so delighted today to be joined by Dr. Elissa Brown. She's a professor of psychology and the executive director of the Child Help Partnership at St. John's University in Queens, New York, my home turf. Her primary clinical and research interests include the prevention and treatment of child trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. She's participated in research on the assessment and treatment of sexual assault, child physical abuse, domestic violence, and bereavement related to traumatic circumstances such as 9/11. Dr. Brown has received funding from the National Institute of Mental Health, New York State Office of Mental Health, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and she's the director of a Category 2 site of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, housed at Child Help Partnership. She's co-developer of Alternatives for Families, a cognitive behavioral therapy, a treatment for family conflict and physical abuse, and a certified trainer of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, a treatment for traumatized youth and their non-offending caregivers, and served on the board of the American Professional Society of the Abuse for Children. Dr. Brown has recently received the Mark Chaffin Outstanding Research Center Achievement Award from the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. Wow. Thank you so much, Elissa, for joining me today.
It's wonderful to be here, Julie. Thanks for having me.
So our topic today is something that I think most professional women struggle with, and that is uncomplicating self-care and what women can do to thrive and take better care of themselves. So I'd like to start by asking you to define, what is self-care? What are we talking about?
Well, Julie, what an important topic this is for all of us. And interestingly enough, self-care was developed as a concept specifically for people who do what I do, people who do mental health care for trauma survivors. And you can imagine how draining that can be for folks. The good news is we have a lot of knowledge about it. And now it is starting to become part of the common vernacular because it applies to so many women working hard and being affected by their work. So the traditional definition of self-care is the steps that we take to challenge what can happen when we are so affected by our personal and our professional lives that other people's stress, other people's trauma causes us anxiety and post-traumatic stress. That's the official definition of self-care. Today, I think of self-care as an ongoing dynamic process through which we have to cope ahead. We have to take care of ourselves because the stress on us as women is heavy. If you're working, there's that stress. If you have a relationship, there's that added stress. And if you have children, there's that added stress. And there is a lot. And then there are other things, of course, as well, taking care of parents, etc. And science really tells us that women bear the emotional brunt of all of those activities. Even if tasks in a home are shared, the emotional burden is carried by women. And that's
because they're coordinating it often, or yeah. And yeah. What you used the term that intrigued me. What is coping ahead?
I love that term.
Yeah.
That term really takes into account this idea that some of the stressful events in our lives are a little predictable. So if we're moving, if we're going through a significant change in a relationship, if our children are having some struggles, we know that there are going to be some stressful moments coming, and we can, in a sense, design a self-care plan to be ready for it.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's another burden on us.
It is, because sometimes we feel the need to design self-care for everybody in our homes.
It
which
doesn't end.
Right, which may or may not be a great idea, but we do that as women. We do that. And Julie, I want to be really clear here. The emotional burden is not just all the scheduling and all the stuff that women tend to do. It's when one of your kids is upset about something, the way women and men react to that is quite different.
Yeah.
And we tend to carry that and feel responsible for the sadness, not the fixing of it, because I think all parents, that's a different topic,
Right,
feel tendency to fix it, but to the sadness, the anxiety that we see in our loved ones, that's what we hold.
So, we've all become familiar with the cosmetic ad that says I'm worth it. But what does that really mean? I mean, that ad always seems to me to try to sell women on things they may not necessarily need. But what do we need, and how do we get it and make it so more accessible? Why do we just seem to struggle with this?
I'd like to talk about 3 steps to self-care as I see it. And I'm drawing a lot from the work of Dr. Lori Perlman, who's an outstanding psychologist, a trauma psychologist, actually, and someone whose work I admire. So, and then I want to talk about how we can get ourselves to actually use these steps, because those are 2 separate issues, right,
Sure.
Julie? Yeah. So the first step is awareness. We have to be aware of our own limitations and our resources, right? What can we hand off to somebody else? What kinds of things overwhelm us? What are we good at, and therefore should invest more in those things? And the second part of awareness is what I would call a body scan. At any moment in time, we're starting to feel that stress. Where do we feel it? Is it a physical reaction we're having? Is it negative thoughts about ourselves in the future? Is it actions that we're taking that might not be so helpful? So really having that awareness of how we're coping. So awareness is step 1. Step 2 is balance. And just to share, I'm a single working mom. And so balance is a concept I see as dynamic, right? If I ever have balance in a given moment, I expect that to change again. So I don't think balance is something to try to achieve and then we're going to keep forever. It's something we're always working on. And I think that's your point a little bit, Julie, about self-care, that it has to be a value system, that we have to prioritize it. And so the science tells us not to just think about balancing work and play, which I think most of us think about. But in the last 15 years, there's been tremendous science suggesting that sleep and rest are just as important as play and work, and really, figuring that out. And when I train professionals in various interventions, and I ask the room how many of them get the 7.5 hours of sleep that we as adults are supposed to get, very few hands go up.
Is that right? Wow.
Very few. And I'm sure that's true of the, the women and men who are, and others who are watching this. The third piece to self-care is connection. And this is really my favorite. This one has the most science behind it. And there's some old work that talks about how women respond to danger and stress. And whereas men go into either fight or flight, women do fight, flight, or affiliate. We really use social support to manage our stress. So we need to be connected to ourselves, of course, right? That's the awareness piece. We need to be connected to others. And that social connection, my suggestion is that we don't just think about it in one arena. I like to have social connections at work, people who understand what I do, they understand my language. I don't have to change the way I talk when I'm talking about my work. But we also need social connections outside of work with people who don't do what we do, right? I shouldn't be talking about the stress of my work all the time.
Right. You need a break from that. You need to change your focus.
Exactly. And then the third connection, which everybody finds in their own way, is that higher purpose. So even if I have a really, really lousy day, but I believe that what I'm choosing to do professionally has a higher cause, right? That's going to get me to go back that next day and keep at it and not get so overwhelmed by
Right.
my
It's a
work.
motivation and it's positive.
Yes. And it's that connection.
Yeah.
For some people, that's going to be religion and spirituality. For others, it's just that sense of, this is what I was put here to do, or these are the children that I'm here to take care of, whatever it is, that higher purpose. So let's all remember awareness, balance, connection. Now, that's quote unquote easy for me to say, right? How good am I at this myself? I think we also have to really think about what's going to get us to engage in self-care. And I'll tell you, interestingly enough, Julie, I think I'm better at it since I've become a mom. And I'll tell you why. Little eyes are watching me.
Ah.
Watch my daughter. I mean, now she's 16 and a half, but when she was little, she was very aware of me and my
So it's
mood
a
and
whole
the
role
choices I was.
modeling, the impact of role modeling.
So I will say to all of you out there, if you won't do it for yourself, think about how you want your children to feel and act and take care of themselves as adults.
So that will help keep you on track in terms of self-care.
Yes. Yes.
So why do we make it so complicated? Why is it, it continues to be such a struggle for women to create this sort of mindfulness about where they're at, how they're feeling, how they're doing, and how they're handling all the stressors around them?
I think it's a combination of some of the things we've already talked about, right? We have all these strategies that can be helpful. We know that exercise is helpful. We know that hanging out with friends is helpful, but we tell ourselves that those are extras.
Like a reward, kind of like a reward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That those are not a priority.
Right.
Those are not on the have-to list. And I would argue, and I'll tell you, most of your internists would also argue, those should not be on the have to. Those should be on the, this is how we take care of ourselves. This is how we stay healthy emotionally and physically. We have to change our thinking, Julie.
Wow. One of the things that, to be honest, that's helped me is actually being involved in organizations like the Quorum Initiative, where we talk about this all the time. I mean, we still struggle with it, but at least it's a topic of conversation. And I find that I do get inspiration from other women who maybe are doing it a little better than me, who have it more, have really adopted these, that kind of mindfulness into their everyday lives. So, I think that's probably very helpful to a lot of women to be with their peers and talking about, keeping it on the radar as a constant topic of conversation. And I think, I wonder too, Elissa, is, we live in a digital world, right? Even if we say we're not influenced by digital media, it's hard not to be. We see so many celebrities and, political figures who talk about perfectionism all the time. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that and how that influences our struggle with self-care.
I think that the media brings up that's a really important point, Julie. I think there's that fear of missing out. So there's I should do more, I should be more, I should see more, as opposed to the word you used, which is mindfulness. And really what mindfulness is about is being right where you are in that moment. And my favorite mindfulness exercises are the ones that use all 5 senses, because what that does is really ground us. And in 5 to 10 minutes, you can take a piece of your favorite candy and you can just ask yourself, as I'm opening it, what does it sound like? As I'm looking at it, what does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? And by focusing solely on those 5 senses, you center yourself. So let's remember that self-care also doesn't have to require leaving work, changing your clothes, going to the gym, right? There are ways to do self-care that can be 2 to 5 minutes. And my suggestion to folks is always to think about What are those self-care strategies that get you away from the stressful moments, whether those be at home or at work? And self-care strategies that you can do right there.
Or wherever you are, right? Like you could just take a moment, take a few minutes for yourself to just be.
Yes. Yes.
I really appreciate what you said about using all 5 senses. I mean, how does that work?
Well, it's an amazing thing, Julie, because each sense is located in a different part of the brain. And so any part of your mind can be triggered by something stressful. And then you start to feel like a pinball machine, right? Because every different part of your brain might be lit up.
Bing, bing, right.
Yeah. And so what mindfulness does is it calms all of those different parts of your brain down, plus the part of your brain that handles emotion. And you're managing it using, the boss, the frontal lobe. So really in a very short period of time, there can be that sense of peace that I think we're looking for with self-care.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I have to be more, I have started meditating more regularly, trying not to punish myself if I don't get to it, but trying to do it more regularly. I've been doing journaling, which is something that works for me.
Well, you're
But
bringing up another very important point, Julie, which is the judgment side.
Oh, yeah.
So whatever it is that we do for ourselves, the mindfulness would say, just sit in it, right? Just experience it, be right there. But then we, as perfectionistic, as you mentioned earlier, perfectionistic women, we say, well, but, maybe I should, I could, these judgment kind of statements really take away the good. And it's really, really important to say, instead of saying to yourself, oh, I should have done it longer, to say to yourself, oh, there I go again, thinking I should have done it longer. And that distances you from the judgmental statement.
And the good that you've just achieved something really powerful, even if it was for 5 minutes.
Yep, exactly.
It gives your brain a rest.
Let's have compassion for ourselves. That's a word I use a lot now that I didn't used to as much. There are things that make me stressed. There are things that make me anxious. It makes a lot of sense why they do. And so instead of judging myself and saying, I should be able to handle that better, I'm working on saying, of course, that stresses me out.
Interesting. So I also am I'm somebody who definitely invests in myself. I mean, invest in professional development, leadership development. I've always done that throughout my career by taking courses, getting my graduate degree later in life, attending, seminars and lectures. And now we're getting ready for the Quorum Initiative How retreat in May, which will take us to a beautiful part of New York State, to just kind of be and kind of focus on ourselves. But a lot of women just they still have a hard time giving themselves permission to spend the money and use their financial resources for leadership development. Is this a kind of, self-care? How does that play into it?
I think it is. I think the way How is run in particular really honors self-care, putting it in a beautiful place, making sure there are opportunities for that connection piece of it. And one of the really important points about self-care is that we should have self-care strategies for us as women, for us as professionals, and also in our organizations. I mean, organizations really vary in terms of whether they promote self-care among their employees. And that is something that Quorum does so beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think just continuing the conversation about it too, having the time to just talk about how we take care of ourselves, things that we need more of is really, really helpful. And it just reinforces what we can do, and that it doesn't, sometimes it takes money, sometimes it doesn't. There are like all kinds of self-care and ways that you can do better for yourself to help you thrive, instead of feeling inundated and burdened as many women do.
Absolutely.
What are some of the ways that you practice self-care, Elissa, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't. I mean, it's really important in the work that I do. And in addition to having my daughter watch me, I'm training a lot of junior trauma psychologists, and they're watching me too. So I do both, Julie. And listen, this is a little, I guess, hypocritical, but I joke, I'm either Dr. Mommy, Professor Mommy, or Mommy for most
Right,
of
right.
the
You have
week.
3 titles, right?
But I do work out with a trainer twice a week. It is a splurge for me. But oh my goodness, that's 2 hours a week that are mine. And
Beautiful.
the trainers I've worked with have been very fortunate. They really do incorporate, there's so much mindfulness, Julie, because you have to pay attention to your form. So I'm thinking about, tightening my abs. I'm working hard to think about my abs and not think about my daughter or my job or,
So you're
whatever.
really in that moment.
It helps. It helps because you're holding heavy weight and you don't want to drop it. So that's sort of my splurge. I also have wonderful friends, including Meg Sullivan and my sister and family, and they bring me a tremendous amount of joy. But the truth is, I talk to them about my work very little. So that's sort of, a choice I make. Some of the work I do is hard to hear about. So I do it partially for them and then partially for me. And then I have these 30-second strategies. If I'm on a stressful phone call, or I have photographs of my nephews and my daughter in my office, and I just turn, I look, I take a deep breath, I smile, and I can come back to what I'm doing.
Those are powerful. Thank you so much for chatting with me today about self-care. You've given, I think, all of us some critical takeaways that we could really start putting into action right now, and that could make a big difference. I do want to end by saying that I hope women who are watching will think about what you just said, how important it is to invest in yourself. And I hope you'll consider joining us at the Quorum Initiative How Retreat at the end of May. You could go to quoruminitiative.com for more information. There are still spaces available. It's just going to be such a chill weekend where we are with other women, like-minded women who want to make change in the workplace and want to help each other thrive. So I hope you'll tune back again for another edition of Quorum Live. And thanks so much for joining us today.